Hello, everyone. Welcome to Promethean Action's live question and answer show. My name is Adam Sturman, and I am joined by the lovely Susan Kokinda and Barbara Boyd. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this Thursday. So the name of today's show is While You Watch Iran, Trump is Dismantling the Empire's Last Capabilities. And I want to start off today by viewing Donald Trump's Truth Social like I like to do now, because I think it's really important that we're all anchored in what the president is actually saying and thinking, and not just anchor ourselves to what's going on the internet and in the news media, because, guys, it's very toxic. So let's start with Donald Trump here. And I want to actually start with this post, right? This was posted about 2 hours ago. Here's how to crush Tehran in 3 moves. And I just went and reviewed this article and thought it was actually a pretty decent overview. And also, I'm sure if Trump is reposting this literally just 2 hours ago, that this is probably much of his own thinking too. So let's just review what this article says. It's a pretty quick read here, especially the introduction is probably the most important part. So I'll just read it here. The small group of Islamist regime loyalists now ruling Iran by committee and may be able to fool the world with AI-generated propaganda videos, paper statements attributed to an invisible Ayatollah, and ChatGPT scripted posts on X, but they can't escape the reality of an American naval blockade pushing their economy off the cliff. President Trump has the upper hand. His best path forward is to pursue 3 lines of effort in parallel: sustain the blockade and accompanying economic warfare to destabilize the regime's hold on the state, remake the world in America's energy dominance image to mitigate long-term price impacts while undermining China's global ambition to defeat the United States, and order the U.S. military to forge a path through the Strait of Hormuz to restore freedom of navigation on our terms, not Tehran's. You might call the later Operation Epic Passage or Blockade Plus. Okay, whether Iran's oil shortage completely runs out in a day or a month, Iran is no longer exporting oil, the lifeblood of its economy, or petrochemicals, steel, or any other product at the level needed to keep the government afloat, banks capitalized, and employees paid. A gasoline shortage comes next. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's Operation Economic Fury is more than just a naval blockade. Okay. I want to jump back to another storyline that popped up in the last 12 hours, which I think Barbara is going to have more to talk about this. So, deranged Jack Smith and his gang are really bad news. Can never be allowed to happen again. They should all be prosecuted. So get this. I think some of you have probably already read this. Prosecutor charged for allegedly emailing self-sealed Jack Script Trump report veiled as cake recipes. All right. I'd like to turn it over to Barbara and Susan.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that people have got to focus on this week is a huge developing dynamic in terms of the midterm elections. What you see with the election results of Tuesday is the rhinos are being punished and on their way out. And that includes, emphatically, Thomas Massie. He's a libertarian, but he fought the president on every single agenda item, which was significant in terms of the White House's efforts to rebuild our economy. And in addition, of course, was his ridiculous participation in the Epstein files and the whole op around Israel, basically killing Charlie Kirk, etc. All right. So, now Washington, as of today, is all astir saying, well, Trump just made a big mistake because now nothing will happen in the Senate because everybody's going to be out for revenge. But that simply highlights the problem we all have here as patriots of the United States in terms of the midterms. We need margins in the Senate and in the House, which are pro-President Trump, pro-MAGA. What does the results of these elections show? Well, for all of the Tucker Carlsons out there, for all of the Candace Owens out there, for the whole PSYOP, which has been run on MAGA, they didn't move the MAGA base 1 inch with all that crap, and aimed at disorienting people. The empire itself, which we'll get into in more depth, is sort of on its last legs. They, this morning, circulated a fake story from Reuters saying that the Ayatollah, wherever he is, nobody knows, says that the enriched uranium must stay in Iran. And so all of the media went completely crazy about that this morning. And the White House came back and said it's total nonsense. It's not happening. So on the one hand, we're very close, it appears, to have some form of negotiated peace, which will ease the pressure on prices, etc. On the other hand, if we have to do exactly what the New York Post article said and disable Iran from being able to act at all, Trump will do that. And that's what we've got to sort of prepare for in our heads. I was thinking this morning, I'm really reminded of Tom Paine's famous opening to, these are the times that drive men's souls, right? The Sunshine Patriots are showing themselves. And you got to think about, we're at 250 years now, and we got to put yourself in the head of every single person who went to war against the largest empire in the world and defeated them through sheer grit, toughness, and creativity. And they didn't know how that was going to come out. There was no guarantee. They put their lives on the line completely for something called a principle, which, is in our Declaration of Independence and in our Constitution, and has existed over these 250 years, come good or ill. So I think I'm very, very optimistic at this point, despite everything you read in the press. Now Trump is really screwed. His poll numbers are way down, the lowest it's ever been, particularly on the economy. That, to me, just defines a challenge. Okay, we have to be able to show people how this economy is being rebuilt from its almost death. People talk about, well, how come we're not decoupling from China? Well, we're basically completely, tied up with China totally by what the previous administrations did. So we've got to rebuild here. That's our task immediately ahead. And it's being done at the same time that the Justice Department is really, really, really going to put people in cuffs. What was this thing around this prosecutor doing her cake recipe steal? What's that about? Well, if you listen to the Democratic Party, if they win the midterms, and if they succeed in unseating Trump in some kind of way, if they actually get the Senate to impeach him, for example, the very first thing they're going to do is restart all of those prosecutions. The classified case that she stole the documents from was dismissed without prejudice. That means it can be brought again. And the whole secret file there said, we may want to actually re-indict this case after the president leaves office. All right, that's the story there. So that's why she stole it. And the Justice Department doing this isn't just some minor thing. It's a big blow in an overall strategy going on behind the scenes to destroy the country yet again through the Democrat Party. So that's how to open it. I think we've got a fight on our hands. I think we're up for it. And I'm really enthused about what's being done and where we're going.
Yeah, let me build on that from the standpoint of what has to become, I think, very conscious and clear in people's minds in the wake of the massive defeat or the Trump win, let's put it that way, in Kentucky. I was monitoring the chatter in the Michigan conservative MAGA Republican networks. Some people, some were surprising to me, some were not so surprising to me, were sitting there saying, oh my God, Massey had a nearly perfect conservative voting record. What is this all about? And then the other narrative, which is out there, Israel defeated Massey, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Look, people have got to put themselves in the real fight, which is going on. First of all, in terms of the Kentucky fight, I think it's extremely insulting to the voters in Thomas Massey's district to imply, that they're being bought by Israeli money. First of all, the total amount of money spent in that was $30 million. It was big, but I saw people say, oh, $30 million was spent to defeat Massey. No, the breakdown was $17 million for the president's choice and $13 million for Massey. And by the way, Massey did get money from some people who are Jewish. But this whole idea, that this is Israel running our policies is just a pile of BS. Because what people voted for in Kentucky is somebody who wants to advance the president's program and not block it every step of the way. And this is where I think it gets extremely important. What is the president's program? The president's program is the American system. The American system is where you use the power of government to protect your people and protect your producers from this British imperial system. Now, and that is MAGA. MAGA is the American system. Now, let me tell you what MAGA isn't. MAGA isn't libertarian, because libertarian is an ideology cooked up through von Mises and the Chicago School and the Austrian School, and it comes straight from British philosophical liberalism. And it basically says markets rule. The invisible hand rules, which to me is a pretty pagan idea. So libertarianism is not MAGA. Obviously, rhinos are not MAGA because rhinos, don't support rhinos are back in the old Wall Street, budget balancing, free market, perpetual wars. Something else that isn't MAGA, Convention of States, which is getting a new lease on life out there as some of the influencers are beginning to push it. What is the problem with all of those, with libertarianism, rhinos, and Convention of States? They all live in the world of the British system. Some of them, and that's the basis of libertarianism. That's the basis of the neocons and the Wall Street crowd and so on. It's also the basis of the Convention of States. They're living inside the British imperial system, which includes a Federal Reserve and includes the power of the City of London. And they never talk about any of that. And they just say, oh, this system is broken, so we have to change our constitution. Well, newsflash, how about this? Yeah, that system is broken. Why don't we go back to the one our founding fathers gave us, called the American system? And that's what MAGA is. And that's what we have to make clear, because the Psy war is at a fever pitch right now. And people have to be absolutely conscious that what this administration is doing is bringing back the policy that the British Empire has feared since our founding, but has especially feared since Abraham Lincoln and William McKinley brought it to its full fruition and made us then the most powerful industrial power on the planet. Not with free markets, not with free trade, not with no government, not with a changed constitution, but rather by using the American system of political economy, which Donald Trump is reviving. That's the issue. That's MAGA. That's what people have to be focused on.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Barbara. And thank you to everyone tuning in right now. If you're watching on YouTube, maybe you can help us out. I forgot to mention this. I meant to. We're on a pathway right now to reach 600,000 subscribers on YouTube, guys. We're less than 1,700 subscribers away. If you've been watching our videos for a while and are not yet subscribed, can you please just subscribe on YouTube right now? That would be super awesome. And if you're already subscribed, please hit the like button. People on X, please share our videos. If you're tuning in on X, I don't think there's like a way to like the video on X. If you can like it on X, please do. Thank you, everyone.
I'm watching the ticker move.
I know it's supposed to be live. Maybe if I go back to it.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. All right. Good to see. Yes, we got some. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Okay, I want to jump into our super chats because we already have some friends. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Melody. I don't remember seeing you and your name up here, so thank you very much, MPF Row. Thank you for joining us. Let's just take this as a quick question. I know this isn't our wheelhouse. Maybe if you ladies have like just a quick thought on this. Whose side is Erdogan and Turkey on, and Azerbaijan? Do you ladies have any thoughts? This is not something that I follow.
Well, Erdogan is on Erdogan's side primarily. I mean, that's what you've got to watch. And Turkey is very much, essentially an independent state. Now, there's a lot of people who say, the next conflict in the Middle East is going to be between Turkey and Israel, all right, because of the fact that, Erdogan is a committed, Islamist. But, he's also participating in Trump's Board of Peace, which is set up to actually say no. And so is Azerbaijan, by the way. To say no in terms of the Middle East. What we're going to do is we're going to build, baby, build. We're not going to war, baby, war anymore. We've had enough of that at this point. And so I don't think you can say, he's on this side or that side or the other side. He's a member of NATO. Turkey's a member of NATO. NATO is on its way out. And I think the overall dynamic right now is being governed by Trump and the United States. And, the Board of Peace concept, which he has, which is overall economic development rather than war for that very troubled region of the world.
Yeah, I second that. And people that I do a lot of podcasts with have the same approach. Erdogan is in it for Erdogan. It's going to be a question of, who's the sheriff in town. And right now, Donald Trump is the main sheriff in town. So, but it can change.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Susan. And thank you, Kevin, for joining us and sending in a question. Now, this question right here is a question that's near and dear to everyone's hearts. It's like the attention of the United States, at least, is really on Los Angeles, and for potentially really awesome reason, right? It's not some terrible tragedy or some disgusting thing. Now, thank you for helping me understand our America First movement. What is going to happen in LA with Pratt? No voter ID in California. Yes, I saw people are already showing all these mail-in ballot irregularities. Will Pratt be able to beat the corrupt system in California? Thank you. Thank you, 1945 LA, for joining us. Barbara and Susan.
Well, the key issue right now is, does he get enough votes to actually force a runoff? And that really is the question. And all of the things he's trying to do with his ads right now, which are very funny, because he's basically got this new series of ads called You Are Not Alone, dealing with ladies in the gym and then dealing with their husbands at a barbecue, where everybody is basically, playing games with one another in terms of whether they're going to vote for Pratt. And they all finally admit, yeah, we're going to vote for Pratt, despite the fact it's not socially acceptable in California to say that, or in Los Angeles to say that. And he's doing a lot of stuff which is going to change the nature of political campaigns. Will it be enough? Well, you've got to overwhelm the system when you're dealing with vote fraud. You've got to do what Donald Trump did in, 2024, too big to rig. And that really is the issue. And people should figure out, if they know somebody in California, particularly in Los Angeles, they should be talking to them and putting them on the line, saying, how are you going to vote? You're going to vote for the future? Or are you going to vote for this sick, agenda, which has governed California, and where, giving teeth to meth addicts is our priority. All right. That is what Pratt is dealing with in terms of the present mayor, Karen Bass. So that's how I'll basically say it. People should not get down about, this is overwhelming, this is going to be fraud, etc. Get out and organize. Organize. If you know people in Los Angeles, get them out to vote. That's what you can do in this situation right now.
I actually agree with the very last thing you said, especially Barbara. Pay attention on what you can do, right? This is the essential thing that's tying up a lot of people. They concern themselves with things that they fundamentally can't change directly, right? Worrying about what's happening on the other side of the world when I'm sitting right here in Northern Virginia. I have no inside connect. There's no way me as a single person is really going to influence anything that's directly going on over there. Instead, I think about how am I going to improve my fellow American? How am I going to take somebody who lives in LA and potentially get them to vote to do some good, right? So that's it, getting people so emotionally tied up in things that you can't influence really, And instead, you need to focus on the things that you can influence and you can change. And most of the times people can start with their own behavior first. That's something you can always change, is your own behavior. So
yeah, let me mention a reference which is pretty dated. I wasn't around in World War II, but this was still very much in the culture as I was growing up. The propagandists, Tokyo Rose and Axis Sally. And what was their main approach? Give up, soldier boy. Your girlfriend is sleeping with your best friend back home. Don't fight, right? Well, that's the equivalent of, I'm not going to vote until I see everybody in handcuffs. I'm not going to vote till we get rid of voting machines. I'm not going to vote till we get rid of paper ballots. I'm sorry. Suck it up, Buttercup. You fight on the battlefield that is given you. And our soldiers in World War II did not listen to Tokyo Rose and Axis Sally. They carried out their assigned missions wherever it was. However small it might have been, where it seems like you're taking 1 foot of territory. This is part of an overall battle which won a war and saved the world from fascism. That's exactly where we are today. So turn off the propaganda machines. And as Adam said, figure out what you can do. If you're in a swing state, figure out how you can mobilize people to vote. Make sure they're registered. Find 10 people that you can get registered who didn't vote before. Do you know a hunter? Do you know an evangelical? These are people who are overwhelmingly MAGA that don't vote. Hunters don't vote, by and large. I'm not trying to insult any hunters who are watching this who do vote, but the overwhelming majority of them don't. Why? Because they think it doesn't make any difference. Well, every vote makes a difference, especially in a critical period like this. So the two things that anybody and everybody can do is spread our message, which is what Donald Trump is really doing in restoring the American system, which is how you really defeat all the things you don't like. And number 2, go find 10 people that you can get to vote who either weren't registered or hadn't or wouldn't have voted anyway.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for the super chats. Thank you, friend, for sending in the question. I have another friend here, David Gray, friend from across the pond. So we have plenty. Okay, after this one, I'm going to switch back to our email questions. Europe's globalism stands on U.S. military funding and tech. Did Trump just remove their foundations? He said the world would be free on July 4th. Are we about to see an entire continent crumble? Independence Day for the planet.
The problem in Europe right now is it's paying the price of its own policies. Basically globalization was based on control of energy in the form of a downshift of the entire world economy around this climate change hysteria, all right, in the recent period. So you shut down nuclear, you shut down Russian gas, you are completely dependent now on somebody else for oil and natural gas. So when the Iran war comes along, kaboom, you're screwed. And, you know, essentially that's what's going on in Europe. German industry is way down. Their response has been to the economic crisis has been to start, you know, basically punishing everybody who looks at the problem and says, we got massive immigration, it's straining our social system, etc. These guys are violent, what have you. And in the UK, just pointing that out puts you in jail for a thought crime. Okay, so Europe is going kaput right now, and Trump is basically saying, we're starting to pull our forces out. You guys better start to realize, A, you're going to have to defend yourselves. B, it probably would be much better if you had a modus vivendi with Russia, instead of the idea that you're going to basically destroy them in a forever war and finance yourself through that war, which is what Europe is actually proposing to do. We're saying, no, we're not going to be a part of that crap. So, you know, that's essentially the dynamic that's going on across the board. And you have Mark Carney out there saying, this is the third way. All right. This is the way that the middle powers, it sounds like something from J.R. Tolkien, you know, the middle powers are going to basically gang up against, you know, China and the United States. And so, you know, that's the central bank of central bankers speaking on behalf of the City of London, clearly trying desperately to find some footing, which Trump is pulling the floor out from under him at every single opportunity. So I think that pretty much defines it. We'll see what happens on July 4th. But the dynamic is there, and they're really hurting because of it.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Susan, any thoughts?
What she said.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, David, for joining us every week. Love having you here, brother. Okay, so, and actually, before we move on, let me just give a quick shout out here. Thank you, Gregory, for your very generous super chat. Thank you all for all you do in the greatest country ever on planet Earth. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to switch to some questions now from our email newsletter. The questions that we read, that I'm going to read here, come from our email newsletter subscribers. Oh, we got a little closer. Yeah, that's the right button. Okay. So these questions come from our email newsletter subscribers. If you are not yet on our email list, we have a free email newsletter. Don't even worry about paying anything to it if you don't have the money to. Just let us stay in contact with you. We do that through our email newsletter. It's how we tell you about when we're doing events, when we're hosting meetings, when we go live, when we post our YouTube videos. We also get articles. We have a bunch of authors that are associated with Promethean Action. We send out articles from our associated writers. So the link to subscribe to our free email newsletter is in the description. Okay. First question here is from Jan. And if these first two questions here, it's probably Jan or something like that. These first two questions are going to be on the connection, the international connection that Iran has. What signals are you looking for that will determine President Trump's success in transforming British banking world dominance enough that he can get out of Iran? Are they not connected? Do you see Iran as a hindrance to Trump's agenda? And the second one here is from Lauren. Why not keep the embargo going indefinitely? Wait until Iran goes bankrupt. Watch the area that contains uranium, which we're definitely doing. And unfortunately, I did see a report, supposedly, that Iran is like trying to they're actually trying to dig this stuff out of the ground and do stuff with it. Close all the Iran accounts and wait London and the Ross Shields out. Thank you, Lauren, for this question. And I think that's some of what Trump was alluding to, this economic attack that's only just going to get worse for the country. Barbara and Susan, your thoughts here on the connection between Iran and the international issue more broadly?
Well, I mean, it's absolutely the case. This is not an attack on Iran per se. Iran has become a critical nodal point in the entire British imperial system. Obviously, the foundation of it is the ability to manipulate and control oil prices through the Straits of Hormuz, and the Iran regime is essentially like, a crazy guy holding a hand grenade, saying, watch out, I'm going to pull the pin. So that's how the British have used this for the past 47 years. Obviously, there's a longer history to how the British have played these different kind of operations in the Mideast. That being said, I think it's very clear that this administration is conscious of this on all fronts. Obviously, you have the kinetic side, the military side, where we have to deal with the actual military role that Iran played. We've clearly degraded their military massively, but you still have the political control of a faction of the IRGC and the mullahs, which have to be, in some sense, neutralized and dissolved. And I think what the administration is doing with the economic warfare, where Iran cannot export oil. And what are they going to do? Start dumping it on the ground? Because once you turn those wells off, they're finished. You don't turn them back on again. You would have to drill all over again. So the administration knows that. And it is using that leverage because clearly, as the president says over and over, I don't want to send this country back to the Stone Age. Most of the people in this country are not crazy. They're people who have a proud culture. And he would love for that to be able to come to the fore again very, very quickly without having to rebuild its own infrastructure. So that's the Iran side of it. That's how he's approaching Iran, and hoping that this economic warfare finally does bring the recalcitrants to their knees as soon as possible. And obviously, there are discussions ongoing behind the scenes with other countries, not excluding Russia and China, in terms of how to bring this to a conclusion. But then you have the other side of it, which is the British side. And that's where you see very sophisticated and surgical economic warfare being taken out by especially the Treasury Department to begin to cut off all the financing networks that have continued to feed this regime. And as we showed in our show yesterday, a lot of those addresses are in London. So they're very conscious of this. Now, does that mean that the British power, let's say we get this conflict resolved with Iran, does that mean British power is completely broken? No, not yet, not by a long shot. But we will have taken a major, major piece off of their chessboard, and they don't have a whole lot left. I mean, you look at everything that this administration has done in terms of rebuilding the United States economically, in terms of showing the complete bankruptcy of Europe and Britain. You had these massive rallies called by Tommy Robinson in Britain last week, where, I mean, when you look at the drone coverage, they are just awesome in terms of the number of people who have come out. So, it's a multi-front war, and the president is moving on all fronts, resolving the Iran conflict by finally taking Iran completely off the geopolitical chessboard will be a major battle won. But I don't think we'll be able to quite declare victory at that point. But we're certainly going in the right direction.
Barbara, any comments?
I think the second part of the question was, is Iran, bad for Trump's agenda? And the answer is obviously he would much rather be focused on other things at this point. And, in terms of the American people, you really ought to be looking at the damn Democrats in terms of why the war is continuing. It's not Trump's basic policy. We destroyed them militarily. it's only continuing because the Democratic Party here has said the U.S. is losing. We've destroyed our entire supply of munitions. Iran is convinced that they can wait Trump out. Where's that coming from? It's not necessarily coming from Iran, although, as he points out in the thing that Adam opened with, their propaganda is pretty good. It's coming from the Democrat Party. And they're acting right now as traitors, in my view, to the United States. So I just wanted to emphasize that point.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Please drop us a like if you've been enjoying the stream so far. All right, I'm going to go a tiny bit off script here, just because this question, let me pull it up. There's more and more discussion about the issue of tick diseases. Just a little personal background. I grew up in part of Philadelphia that was right next to called Pennypack Park, which is part of the Fairmount Park system in Philadelphia. And Pennypack Park, Philadelphia to this day has a huge deer population that lives in these park areas. And we had deer ticks getting Lyme disease in Philadelphia back in the late 80s, early 90s. Now we have this thing called alpha-gal syndrome. And a very close friend of mine who lives in rural Virginia, just, maybe 30, 40 miles from here, he got alpha-gal disease just a few years ago. And it's becoming such a big thing now that they're engineering, supposedly they're trying to engineer pork that doesn't have the alpha-gal in it. But there's this discussion. So let me just read the question. What the heck with Gates and the red meat ticks? Tell me these just crazy junk on social media. Thank you for everything you do every day to get the USA back. And I just want to say the incidence of alpha-gal red meat disease is going up very fast.
Yeah, I mean, I can sort of talk about that a little bit in terms of Northern Virginia, which is tick central. And, the problem isn't, that people are releasing ticks into the environment. And that's, talk about a cyborg image in your head, ticks come in and basically destroy everything. All right.
Dropping them by airplane. That's what they were talking, dispersing them by air and putting boxes in places.
Right. I think what you're seeing is the fact that we don't fundamentally, all right, we don't understand scientifically the immune system. That's where the problem starts in reality, because, basically Lyme disease and other things that you get from ticks are immune diseases. All right. And so in Northern Virginia here, we have ticks all over the place because it's not just the deer and then the mice, and that's really where you get stuff. And we don't really clear the areas very well that actually have ticks in them. So I think this is basically something that is going on in known areas of the country where ticks are very, very dominant, and we haven't succeeded in eliminating them. I think that it's being topped off because you have now an obvious attempt by somebody, I don't know from whom, to create another idea of a pandemic as a way of actually defeating America. They didn't do well with the ship-borne craziness that happened, which they hyped in the media. Now we've got Ebola from Africa. And I tend to think that the overall thing about many of the tick things, although it deserves immediate attention in terms of really thinking about it, is simply part and parcel of the same type of cyber operation. So I don't think that Bill Gates is out there dropping ticks from airplanes, although, you could make that assumption given that it's red meat, which is the allergy which is being talked about. Okay. But I don't think that's it. I think this is an occurring phenomenon in nature, which needs to be directly attacked. And I think the administration will have things to say about that.
Yeah, I just want to read one comment from Andrew. I trust ticks. It's Gates I don't trust. I mean, one will presume that whatever is happening natural or otherwise, Bill Gates is going to try and take advantage of it. That is definitely a fair assumption.
Yeah, it's the Lone Star ticks. That's the tick that can sensitize you. And it's what's really interesting is that alpha gal is a saccharide. It's related to a sugar molecule. And somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is one of the first cases of a human getting sensitized to a saccharide, to a sugar molecule. Usually gets sensitized to something like a protein, right? Not to a sugar molecule. So the alpha gal is a really unique allergy in that regard.
I just add one other thing. You know, this is happening where we actually have a HHS secretary who is trying to improve the health of the American people as opposed to the health of the pharmaceutical companies. So I think it's going to be important to see what this administration says and does about this.
Thank you, Leslie, for sending in that question. I know that was a little bit, I saw that and it was something that was on my mind, so I went for it. Thank you, Leslie, for sending it in. Thank you for joining us. Okay, I want to go back and take some more questions from, I want to stay on this Iran issue. Now we're going to switch to the domestic side of the issue because everyone is still feeling the heat at the pumps. It's just, the heat's been rising in that regard. So let me pull up the next slides here. So I'm going to have 4 on this general issue here. So the first one here is from Greg. Why do you believe that Trump has not continued with the opening of the Strait of Hormuz? It would certainly improve the Republicans' chances in the midterms if successful. Thank you, Greg, for your question. Ken says, shouldn't oil prices in the USA be plummeting with the glut of oil flowing? Could President Trump create a reserve with a favorable price to Americans? Thank you, Ken. Was it necessary to start a war with Iran? It gave poisonous PR to other Democrats to undermine the president. Thank you, Tad. And finally, from Johan. Hi, y'all. Really enjoy your vids. As I watch reruns, I see from the shadows. Wow, I just woke up. Thank you, Senior Barbara, for explaining so much. I see now. My concern is now President Trump has eliminated the Hormuz chokehold. How can he take over the actual price of oil set by Lloyd's of London? As I feel this has to be done as the final nail in the coffin in the city of London. Thank you both, and thank you, Adam. Great job. Love you all. Thank you. Thank you very much, friend. Barbara and Susan. This is this issue of the price of oil, and I think one of the physical dynamics that people don't understand. Let me just reiterate this. Is the fact that the American oil refineries, the oil that we use to produce our gasoline, that type of oil doesn't come from the United States, right? We have to import that oil. So even though we are net energy positive, we're exporting all this other types of natural gas and oil products. We still, in order to keep our gasoline flowing, our refineries run on oil that comes from outside countries. So I think that's a big misunderstanding people have. Barbara and Susan, your thoughts, though, on this Iran and oil markets and Lloyd's of London?
You muted yourself, Barbara.
This is oil politics, okay, and it's a very deep area in terms of how the world actually works. You've got a problem here with the oil companies themselves, not just the City of London setting the prices. But remember, when Trump first brought the oil executives into the White House and said, you know, I want you to basically start pumping out oil like it's no tomorrow, Exxon and other people said, no, we would rather have, you know, shareholder value. We would rather just keep it where we are right now. You know, that's a risky business, going out there and trying to find new sources of oil or trying to build new refineries or trying to do more in that area. All right. So you've got significant problems in terms of, you know, make yourself a chart showing the supply chain for, just as Adam said, for where does my gas come from? How does it actually work? Where is it refined? Are those refineries at capacity? And the answer is Trump has started reviving all of it but it's not going fast enough to actually alleviate the prices. What would alleviate it? Well, actually ending this war on favorable terms to the United States. Look, Trump has said over and over and over again, Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. For people who don't understand the implications of that, think about it in terms of the Middle East. Israel has nuclear weapons. People get all hot and bothered and say, isn't that the fundamental dynamic that Israel has nuclear weapons? Well, it's true, but do you really want to box Israel into a situation where it might think for its own existence, it might have to use them? I want to, think about that for just a second in terms of reality. Now, Iran gets a nuclear weapon. All right. The Saudis, the UAE, everybody else says, holy crap, we need nuclear weapons too. Now you've got a huge problem because it radiates out into the entirety of Eurasia. And it creates the potential for a real nuclear holocaust or nuclear terrorism. How's that for, thinking about something, a dirty bomb in New York City, a dirty bomb in any major city in the United States. That's what you're talking about. You're talking about giving crazy people access to the ultimate weapon, which could destroy us all. So, people are all upset about why did Trump do this? This was crazy. It hurt him. You're listening to the propaganda which has been produced by the British Empire and the Democrat Party here in a treasonous way to actually say this was some kind of mistake. You should have just let Iran go ahead and do what it was going to do somehow, and we'd all alleviate ourselves from this. Trump is doing things that every president, has said over and over and over again. Iran can't have a nuclear weapon because, the mullahs are crazy. Very simple proposition. But nobody has ever done anything about it because they were scared of the U.S. implications that Americans have grown so soft that they can't actually see the larger picture, which is really what's being played upon here, to be perfectly blunt about it. I think that basically you're going to see an end to this war within a couple of weeks. At most, it's either going to end because Trump does a final blow and wipes the whole, kind of ability to do things off the face of the map, or you're going to see a resolution because Russia, China, and everybody who's in that back channel actually produces results which are favorable to the United States. But the principle here is really important to think through in your own mind. From the standpoint of how the president was actually thinking about it. He says it every day. I'm sorry the gas prices are so high. I'm sorry that you're suffering because of it, but please think about the implications of Iran having a nuclear weapon. With regard to the Strait, right now we're blockading Iran coming out of the Strait with oil. We're not escorting ships through the Strait. That is increasing. The traffic has increased, but we're blocking them in an economic war to actually break their will. And I think that's probably a better strategy than trying to escort ships through the Strait. Anytime a terrorist from anywhere in the Middle East gets a man pad and puts it on his shoulder and shoots a weapon, those ships are open targets. So, I think it's pretty clear why the president didn't do that right away. I think that if Iran doesn't come to the table within a very short period of time, you're going to see the Strait completely open, but Iran completely destroyed. And I think that's essentially the dynamic in the situation.
Yeah, and I want to address the oil pricing side of it because I don't know what it's going to take to shift the pricing of oil away from the Brent crude futures market, which is a market in London, big surprise, based on oil which transits shipping lanes. In other words, this is sort of the classic British imperial model. You don't control the production. You control the shipping, the insurance, the financing, the distribution. And it's that Brent crude futures market which currently sets the price of oil. Now, we have what's called West Texas Intermediary, the WTI market, which is based on what you actually produce. But again, as Barbara and others said, we still import the kind of product that you need for gasoline, so it's still dependent on this Brent crude market. I don't doubt for a minute that somewhere in the discussions that Scott Bessent is having with the President of the United States, there are discussions in terms of how do you shift the pricing of oil away from Brent crude to actual production. We're not there yet. It's probably not something you're going to see in the middle of a conflict with Iran, but I have no doubt that it's under discussion. And one of the things that has happened as a result of this conflict with Iran is that a whole lot of this has become much more transparent. Who knew about Lloyd's of London before this? Who understood, that it was Lloyd's of London that basically set all insurance, not just for shipping. I was at a local event here, and some contractor in Michigan, some contractor came up to me and said, "I'm so glad you explained that about Lloyd's of London," because then I began exploring it and thinking about it, and I realized, how much insurance rates are controlled by these big conglomerates and how that controls everything else. In other words, a whole lot is coming out into the open, including, I think, the role of the way Brent crude futures set oil prices. So in a certain sense, the table is now set to begin to discuss maybe there's a way to do this which doesn't play by the British Empire's rules.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Susan. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I'm going to switch back to some super chats, and then I have a bridge right back into our email questions. So the first one's a little bit of a shout out. So thank you, Curtis Good. I'm currently on a work project as a CNC machinist here in Wixom, and would like to give a shout out to the Bowens and Lances with my local Promethean pack back home in Texas. Love y'all. Thank you very much for the shout out, Curtis, and thank you for joining us. And hopefully the Bowens and the Lances are watching it. They should
Curtis, be. If you're here long enough, maybe we'll cross paths here in Michigan. You can certainly send a message and let us know where you are, and we'll let you know if there's any local events that we're going to be at.
Thank you very much, Curtis. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so the next question, we're going to take a few of them. It's going to be on China. So thank you again, MPF. Is Putin and Xi an ally of Trump, or do they share a common enemy, the cabal? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, why don't you answer this one, because it's a little bit more positive, and then we're going to stay on the China topic, but attack it from a different angle. So Barbara and Susan, your thoughts on Putin and Xi being an actual ally of Trump?
Well, there's a whole lot of history here in terms of answering this, because first you have to start with how the British have been playing the great game for over a century and a half to make sure that major superpowers are not allied with each other. And coming out of World War II, obviously, the major powers among our allies included the Soviet Union and China, which was not under the CCP coming out of World War II. And it was very clear that the British policy, the British imperial policy, contrary to Franklin Roosevelt's, was that you had to keep these powers fighting each other so that the British could continue to maintain their puppet master control over the world. You go back even further in history, what you find in both Russia and China is a very strong American system tradition. In Russia, it goes back to Tsar Alexander II. If you want to take it back even further, the great philosopher Leibniz, who really played the critical role in the philosophical outlook that led to the founding of America, played a major role in Russia, including the founding of Russia's Academy of Science. You go to China in the 20th century, Sun Yat-sen, the founder of modern China, at the beginning of the century, was an open American system advocate. I believe he was raised by missionaries in Hawaii. So what you have in these countries is older traditions where it's not just we share a common enemy. You have these older traditions in these countries which legitimately share the recognition that the British imperial system is the problem in the world. And let's not forget China's experience with the British Opium Wars. So fast forward to today. I mean, both, Russia and China are two very, very different countries in terms of the dynamic that's running them and in terms of whatever the factional situations must be in them. But I think it's absolutely the case that both Putin and Xi look at the world from their own perspectives, but from the same fundamental standpoint that the president does. We're a sovereign nation. We should be able to call the shots for our country, not some globalist, although I think there is a stronger globalist faction in China, which I happen to believe is not Xi Jinping, than in Russia. But from the standpoint of the general dynamic, we don't want the globalists running the show. I think China's played a little bit more footsie for their own advantage. But again, Rubio, President Trump, they keep saying the same thing. If I were China, I would have done what they would have done. We gave them the advantage to take advantage of us, and they took it. But, the difference between a country which is acting in its own self-interest, even if that may conflict with us, is very different from a country which is acting as a pawn of the British Empire. And I don't think either Russia or China largely at this moment are certainly not Russia, but at least a part of the Chinese leadership, I think, is not acting as a pawn of the imperial leadership. And that's a pretty profound basis upon which we can work with each other. There will be conflicts and they will be sorted out, but not the manufactured conflicts which have kept us at each other's throats and which fostered the more dangerous elements in a country. It's pretty much a slam dunk when you start pulling the historical string on some entity or some force, which is a real problem in the world, like, say, the Muslim Brotherhood or the Chinese Communist Party. Guess what? Pull that string hard enough, you're going to find the British behind it.
Thank you, Susan. Barbara, any thoughts?
No, I think that was a perfect way of handling it.
All right. Thank you very much, friend, for sending in the question. Now I'm going to jump back to some questions here from the email newsletter on this issue of China. Let's actually go to this one here, which is another thing that is on people's minds, which is the issue of China and farmland, actually. Okay, so these next questions here are going to be China and the United States. First question here is from Susan. Following the China summit, President Trump commented that it would be good for China to own more U.S. farmland, send even more Chinese students to our universities, and import more U.S. beef at a time when we seem to have a shortage here. Just because he and Xi had a nice summit does not magically erase the documented national security threat posed by the first two, which are viscerally opposed by his base, and the consumer scarcity posed by the third. What is behind these concessions? Thank you, Susan, for your honest question. I have two more here. Next one's from Scott. When President Trump commented on China buying farmland, he said it was good for the farmers. He also said he didn't like that, but it will help the farmer. How? Thank you, Scott. And the third one here is from Jane. While I was watching Iran, President Trump advised on Hannity that while not loving it, China should be allowed to purchase U.S. farmland. At the same time, Congress is attempting to pass a bill preventing China from purchasing U.S. farmland. Are these conflicting messages, or was President Trump's statement given knowing about the forthcoming bill? Can you explain this? Thank you, Jane. Very good question.
Yeah, good questions. I mean, first of all, as I understand it, what the president was referring to in this Hannity thing is if you just start suddenly forcing the Chinese to sell, it's going to collapse land prices, and that's what's going to hurt the farmers. But beyond that, Adam, can you share my screen? Oops, damn, I got the wrong one. Hang on, let me do it another way. All I need to do is do a screen share. Okay. We see that, Adam? Are we good? Okay. Seeing these questions, I said, all right, let's do a little bit of a search in terms
can you hit the start slideshow button so it full screens, because it's very hard to see.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you're right. Okay. There we go. Better?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All righty. This is who actually owns U.S. farmland. Number one, Canada, 15%. Number two, multiple. I will get to that in a minute. Number three, the Netherlands. Number four, the United Kingdom. Look down there, number 14, the Cayman Islands, which is the equivalent of the British. So let's look at who actually owns U.S. farmland. But then obviously you're justified to say, who is the other, right? Are the Chinese hiding behind that? Well, here's where most of it is. And again, this last column shows adversary linked risk, i.e. how much of it is the Chinese or whatever. This is that other. Most of it is renewable energy and most of it is European. And then you've got the Cayman Islands, anonymous US shells, multi-country private investors, which could obviously include the Chinese. But the bottom line is, while I don't think, China should be owning any of our farmland, I don't think it's as big a risk as it's being made out when you look at the actual breakdown. Honestly, the Canadian government is being a lot more hostile toward the United States than the actual Chinese government at this point. So I think people just have to put these things in context. This is sort of a classic example of one of these internet stories which just takes on a life of its own, and it's like China owns all of our farmland. No, I'm sorry, it's actually Canada, with the British coming in not too far behind. So let's look at who actually is hostile to us. I also did a grid in terms of how much of that Chinese farmland is next to our military bases. It's a very, very small percentage. Again, should it be any of it? I don't think so. But I think Donald Trump's approach to all of this is sometimes you can't just rip the Band-Aid off. In other words, if you went in and demanded all of that land be sold, maybe it would collapse farm prices and maybe it would help or hurt other farmers in the area. So, I have not seen Donald Trump act in any way which is not responsibly trying to figure out how to extricate ourselves out of these problems without causing some kind of massive dislocation, which is going to hurt Americans in another way.
Yeah, I want to add something. Do yourself a research project. Everybody thinks that the APAC Israel lobby is the big deal. Take a look at the anti-China lobby. Take a look at the Taiwan lobby, and you'll be quite shocked. Okay, the point is that there's a whole post-war industry here, which was built up on the idea that we got to get out of the Ukraine war because the next war is going to be with China, and we're being distracted by Ukraine. And Steve Bannon, other influencers are 100%, kill the CCP. That's your primary obligation in life. All right. Well, where's he getting his money from? That's a question which you should be asking. And, the idea here that Trump has is, let's actually see, first of all, owning the farmland is not the major problem that farmers have right now in the United States. We don't have a lot of young people going into farming. The whole idea of American farming is going out the window unless we can make it profitable for the farmer. The point is that most of the farmers that we have are actually working two jobs at this point. One is on the farm because they love farming. But look up what the average age of our farmers is. What about the pricing? Well, look at the cartels, and the Justice Department is going after the key cartels in terms of meat processing at this point. But, big ag essentially has killed family farms and killed a lot of the basis of U.S. farm production. So if a farmer gets a break because somebody comes in and actually buys up the land and gives him a temporary financial break, I think the president is pretty realistic if you understand the overall problem. Okay. But we got to find a way to actually support our farmers, to support what they're doing, and to support, a variety in crops, not just soybeans or ethanol, but the actual basis to become absolutely food self-sufficient once again, with farmers earning a decent living from the farm. And that's the major problem here. All of this stuff about who owns the land and this, that, and the other is avoiding the main problem we got to solve.
Yeah, Kathy just mentioned the inheritance tax killed many farms, which the big, beautiful bill did reverse, although a lot of damage has been done.
Thank you, ladies. I'm going to jump back to more domestic issues here with the midterms and stuff. First, I'm sorry for not pulling up this question earlier. I should have taken it back when we were talking about this, but I think this is really important. Pushing back a little bit, it seems like libertarians never shut up about auditing, reforming, and abolishing the Fed. What do you mean that's not MAGA?
Well, one particular hobby horse, which certainly is the libertarian one, is not the whole MAGA program. Let me ask a really simple question. When you get rid of the Federal Reserve, what do you replace it with? Do you replace it with unfettered control by the markets, which are run by London? So, it's a very visceral issue. If you give me a binary choice, do you want to get rid of the Fed? I would say yes, if that was the only response I could give you. But, the real question is, how do you get back to the American system? What is national banking as opposed to the Federal Reserve? The libertarians are against the American system when it comes to their basic economic philosophy, directly against the American system. The entire Austrian school and the Chicago school was created as a counter to the American system of Alexander Hamilton. And, my assertion is that MAGA is the American system, is where I'm coming from when I say this isn't MAGA.
Thank you very much, Susan. Barbara, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that there's certain things that the libertarians talk about which are really, as Susan said, visceral issues. You can't find a better account of all of the corruption which went on around the Ukraine war than Scott Horton's books in terms of dealing with that. His very long book detailing every specific point of corruption. And that's very valuable, okay? But the underlying philosophy, which underpins, libertarian thinking and underpins, for example, Americans for Prosperity and other things like that, is fundamentally anti-U.S. government. It's fundamentally anti the government having any role at all in economic affairs. And, our success economically, historically, you can prove it to yourself. You can go back and look at McKinley. You can go back and look at Alexander Hamilton. You can go back and look at the Civil War with Abraham Lincoln, has been based on and Franklin Roosevelt's war mobilization. It's all been based on a use of governmental powers together with private industry towards a great national purpose. And winning the Civil War, getting out of debt after the Revolution, getting ready for World War II and gearing up production, which produced the most productive economy in the entire world by the end of World War II. And if you ask a libertarian, would you support that kind of mobilization, they will inevitably say absolutely not. It's an intrusion on fundamental freedoms, whatever that means. Yes, there are valuable contributions which libertarians have made. It's a very seductive type of philosophy. Me first, basically, my freedom's ahead of everything else. I want to smoke dope. I want to be able to do all of these things, in terms of the culture. But overall, it really doesn't have a whole hell of a lot to do with the economics which put us here.
I do also want to, since this came up, I want to answer a comment back up there saying, what do you mean the Convention of States is anti-American? It's in the Constitution, Article 5. Yes, it is in the Constitution. And in 250 years, we've never used it because people realized it's a very dangerous door to open. And instead, we amended our Constitution by going through state legislatures. We're not going to get into this here, but when you look at the people pushing the Convention of States at the top, I don't mean all the people who have been sucked up in the I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it any longer side of it. It is pretty much the heart of darkness from the standpoint of the anti-Trump establishment. And again, I just keep coming back to the obvious. There's nothing wrong with the American system. The British just haven't let us use it for 125 years. So why don't we deal with that first?
Thank you very much, ladies. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. Next questions are going to be on California governor, South Carolina, and how do we actually reach other people with this message? And I'd like to thank you, again, definitely not Obama, for sending in your question. We appreciate it. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so the first question here I'm going to do is from Shell. Would Susan Kokinda and Promethean Action vote for Hilton or Bianco? What is their perspective on which candidate is best for California's economy and turnaround? And this next one's here. Let's take these two on the California governor's race. Hilton versus Bianco. Who's best for California? Brian.
All right. Let me just start by saying I'm glad I'm not in California. I'll be very honest. Our friends in California are actively organizing for Bianco. Donald Trump has endorsed Steve Hilton. I would want to be much more involved in the thought process that led to the president doing that before I made a decision. That being said, I'm glad I'm not in California.
Barbara, any thoughts?
Personally, I'm not that concerned about the governor's race in California. I mean, I hate to talk to folks about it, but I'm really more concerned about all of those congressional elections in California with the redistricting and so forth, because many of the seats which gave the Republicans the majority in the House are in California. So what I tend to look at, and it may be just a little bit nerdy, is what's the impact on those congressional elections of the governor's race. I think the future of California is really being determined by Spencer Pratt, to be blunt, because he's saying the obvious in terms of everything that is wrong. You can look at Hilton, his British bona fides and his American bona fides are very recent issues to think about. I really think that you got to think more clearly about the nation as a whole. And my basic thinking constantly is, how does this affect the midterms one way or the other? And that's where I put my thinking on the thing. As Susan said, but I'm not in California, so I have the perspective of someone sitting completely outside and probably not making a whole hell of a lot of sense in terms of California itself.
Let me add one other thing for people who may not know. California is a jungle primary. In other words, everybody, Democrats, Republicans, are on the ballot, and the top two are the ones who will go to the general election. Well, that being said, it sure would be nice if the top two, and I'm not ranking them in either order, I'm saying them in alphabetical order, are Chad Bianco and Steve Hilton. And then let the voters choose between the two of them. I mean, because I'm seeing a bunch in the chat, people in some candidate I've never heard of that we should be voting for. Well, I'm sorry, if you vote for anybody other than Chad Bianco and Steve Hilton, you're going to give the Democrats a leg up to get in the top two.
I didn't even realize California had that jungle primary like that. So you could have two Republicans on the ballot. Wow, that would be wild. What a revolt that would be. And let's actually, speaking of that, let's bring up South Carolina. I live in South Carolina. I'm trying to figure out why President Trump would support Lindsey Graham. Thank you, Lisa.
I'm giving that one to Barbara.
Well, I don't know, to tell you the truth. You know, I think it has to do much. It doesn't have to do that much with Lindsey's perversions in terms of foreign policy and other things. I think it has a lot more to do with his sitting on various committees in the Senate, which are critical to the entire Trump budgetary process. You know, and, you know, you're going to get, for reasons I don't understand, the president likes certain people that I basically react to and say, why that one of all people? It's Donald Trump, you know, and he basically thinks he can control the guy and use him for whatever purpose he's using him for. And that's the only thing that I can think of as being the reason for it. I agree with you that it strikes me all the time as I listen to him on Fox and I say, why? The guy's a jerk, an idiot, and a genocidalist. But at the same time, he is who he is, and he sits on the committees in the Senate he sits on. So that's how I'd answer your question.
Thank you, Barbara. And I'm going to take two here talking about what can we do. So first one here is from Gary. We know what's really going on, but how do we reach out to the rest of America? Thank you, Gary. And then Mike has a slightly longer with more observations. I've been very active in the Republican Party, run for office, and have a fairly active group of both donors and supporters. I've been sharing your videos, which I think are starting to help them look at things in a different light. It would be helpful if you could direct me either to a brochure, some kind of document I can glean talking points from in order to interest my group in learning more about your take on national, international events, such as a document. Second part of my question is that your views, which make sense and are becoming my views, it helped me expand the way that I think and look at events, are not easily adopted because it causes an individual to have to really think again. The same request is there somewhere. I could go on and simply find a short document or talking points that I can share to interest them in your organization. And would somebody be willing to speak at a Republican club that we started in January that tends to be not the hard right conservatives, but more the mainstream conservative moderate? We also allow independents and undeclared to join our groups. So that part of the question, I guess, is how can I arrange a speaker, or is that possible? Thank you very much, Mike, for your questions and for telling us what you've been doing. So many guys, you have to realize so many people in the country are beginning to do stuff like this more and more.
Well, look, the real issue is keeping people focused on what it is that Donald Trump is doing. Last week, I spoke at 3 different Lincoln Day dinners throughout the state of Michigan. And my theme in all of them was calm down. This is what Donald Trump is really doing. And the focal point of all of it is this question of the American system. Nothing makes sense unless you go back to the basics. The fight in the world for over 250 years has been the American system versus the British system. And once people figure this out, then the talking points kind of flow from there. Now, that's the reason that we produced this flyer, which I think, Mike, might answer your questions. Let me try and share my screen again. Hold on. Share screen. Did I share it, Adam?
No, it didn't show up on my.
Oh, yeah, I got to hit one more thing. Share screen. There we go. All right. Here's our flyer for your talking points, Mike. And it really does try and encapsulate this American system idea. We use the provocative title, President Trump's Republican New Deal, because the president himself said that back in January. But it tries to capture the idea that the system that everybody has been stuck in for half a century is the British imperial system. And what the president is doing is breaking the system, as Scott Bessent says. It's a bad system, so we're going to fix the system. And then on the back, whoops, I don't have the back side. I guess I don't know. On the back side of this flyer, we have some of the some of the receipts in terms of what President Trump has actually already done. Now, you can get that by going to our Promethean PAC website and getting the flyer. Adam, maybe you could pull the website up on the page. Oh, yeah, there it is. And also, joining our Promethean PAC midterm boot camps. We will have one tomorrow night. Again, go to the Promethean PAC website, which I'm sure Adam just gave you, I think, the QR code up there. And in the upper corner, you're going to see our midterm boot camp drop down. This is where we bring together activists from all over the country every 2 weeks, although I think at some point we may have to start doing it every week as this fight intensifies, to problem solve in terms of how to get these ideas out to the population, to change the agenda, to make sure that this is the basis of what people are talking about, not the individual issues, which in and of themselves may grab people's emotions, like Chinese farmland. But again, step back and look at the big picture and look at what it is this administration is doing to restore our actual economic policy, the one that made us the most feared nation in the world up against the British Empire and the globalists. If we can draw more and more people into that discussion, however it fills itself out, whether it's showing people how the price of gasoline is determined by London and the Brent crude futures market, whether it is bringing to the inner city the potential of skilled jobs for kids who otherwise would be trapped in these hellholes for the rest of their life. How can we bring the reality of this transformation? And that's the important thing. This is a transformation. People have to get out of being stuck in a system which hasn't worked for decades and reacting to that, and get into Trump's world where he is changing it in a dramatic and an absolutely revolutionary way. If we do that, I'm confident that we're going to win the midterms bigly. Clearly, the response of the Republican base in Kentucky and Indiana and Louisiana and these other primaries, they're with Trump. But the Republican base then has the responsibility of going outside the Republican base and recruiting other people. And we're trying to give you the tools and the colleagues to do that. One of the great things about our boot camp and our new circle community is we're providing a place for people to come together who are on point on this mission. So that is how I would answer that.
Thank you, Susan. All right, so the links, the QR code in there is a link for the half-page flyer that Susan just showed you. But if you go to prometheanpact.com, if you want to be a part of our midterm boot camp process, you can just go to prometheanpact.com, and the sign up is on the upper right-hand corner if you're on desktop. And if you're on mobile, just press the menu button out, and you'll find the place to subscribe to our Circle community, which is quickly growing, actually.
I think I just shared it, right?
Okay, yeah, I see the homepage.
Okay, so here's just a quick roadmap. Here's the flyer that I showed. You can order it here. It's all on the homepage. Here's the midterm boot camp sign up. Sign up for our midterm boot camps. Next one is tomorrow. After that, we're shifting to Mondays. And that's the essentials.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to make a point here that this is not the Promethean Action website. I always have to make this refrain. We have two organizations. We have Promethean Action, which is who's hosting this webcast, right? This broadcast right now. And then we have Promethean PAC. And the separation is that Promethean Action, we can talk about ideas, but we can't spend money to influence a campaign. We can't tell you to go vote. We can't run get out the vote campaigns. Promethean PAC has to do that. So that's why we have two websites, and everything we've just been talking about for like the last 10, 15 minutes, the Circle community, plus this leaflet over there, that's all on our Promethean PAC website. So if you just search for Promethean PAC instead of Promethean Action, you'll find our website immediately. We have good SEO. So that's just a little bit of background. Thank you, Barbara and Susan. So I'm going to just, how about this? Everyone on YouTube, please drop a like if you've been enjoying us. Also, I'd just like to mention that we are getting really close. Let me just pull this up on the screen again in case you didn't hear it. We're getting really close. This is supposedly the live counter. We are less than 1,200 YouTube subscribers away from reaching 600,000 subscribers. Thank you, everyone, for helping us achieve this goal. We have almost 150,000 people across the world that are receiving our email newsletter. That's an incredible number. If you're interested in getting our free newsletter, the link is in the description. So thank you, everyone, for helping us achieve this. I'm going to switch back and take some more super chats. I'm very sorry, everyone, if I can't get to your super chats. We start getting hit with so many. It gets really hard to get to them all. First, thank you very much, Q Baby, for your super sticker. Stefano, thank you for joining us again, friend. After this, I'm going to get to some questions from Alberta, from the Alberta situation. So we appreciate all the support from up north. Love what you are doing. You are able to be guests on Joe Rogan, Steve Bannon, Diary of a CEO. You need to get your information out to the world. Yes, we agree. If anyone out there has a connection, here, somebody else says, Rosemarie, please do a contact with Victor David Hansen. I agree. His audience and our audience would be such a great match. We're not in discussion with any of his production team at all, but I agree with this alignment. This would be an absolutely wonderful alignment for both his audience and our audience. All these things would, if we can get us on that would be awesome to get on Diary CEO or Joe Rogan, even possibly being on a Steve Bannon show. I think that would be great for our audiences. So thank you very much, Stefano. Thank you for joining us. Okay, and now let's start with the candidate and Carney stuff. Okay, so I'm not even going to try and mispronounce the French there. One thing that confuses me, if Carney is invested so much in the U.S., won't he lose by destroying them? Barbara and Susan, your thoughts on this? We're going to take some Canadian questions now.
Well, I don't think he really thinks that way. He's got a full-time wife, salary from the City of London for everything that he's done, over the last however long he's been doing this stuff. So he's not really all that concerned about anything other than destroying the U.S. And that's his mission. That's the mission he's been assigned to. He's tried it by actually, from his early days at Goldman Sachs going forward, he has been about one thing, trying to take the dollar out as the world's reserve currency, which would have, at this point in our overall physical economic development, really completely devastating impacts on our country. That's been his role up to this point. I did it in the video I did, my last video, I went through it in terms of everything he's tried to do on that front. He was the Bank of England in their opening to China, in which the City of London was trying to totally capture China as essentially their new and continuing money source. And that if you go back during that period and look at what the statements were coming out of the UK government, you'd see, it's true that, we're offshoring all of our production, but that's really not what should upset you, because we've got this whole advantage in terms of just being able to magically create money, cash, and control of vital resources, which is the empire's mode of doing things. So Mark Carney is just the new face right now of, the British Empire in its last, kind of stumbling about, trying to find a way to revive itself at this point in history. And that's what his whole entire portfolio is all about. And Canada has always been a premier location for operations against the United States. I was just watching in Congress this week, the head of AfricaCom for the Pentagon was testifying that even in Africa, when they're looking at drug trafficking coming out of Africa, they found the Sinaloa cartel, and it was primarily going out of Africa to the US and to Europe through, guess what country? Canada. So that really sort of gives you a sense of what the entire battle for Canada and with Carney is all about.
I'll just mention a comment I saw in the chat from Diane3443. She said, "You would be awesome on Nino's Corner. Small world. I was supposed to be on this afternoon. They had to postpone, so I'm going to be on June 9th. So Diane, you can mark your calendar for that." And I know Adam is going to pull up more questions on Alberta. Oh, he's back. We'll let him get to Alberta now.
Thank you for covering me there for a sec. Just had to take a quick break. Yes, so let's pull up some Canada questions. This week we had an exceptional amount of questions coming in about Canada. I think it was because of the Mark Carney video. Okay, so I'm going to take, I think, 3 here. Yes, let's take the next 2 questions. First one's from Lucy. When and how do you think Trump will rescue the Canadian people from the Marxist government everyone in Canada is living with since Marxist Carney took over as PM? Thank you very much, Lucy. Dr. Ivory says, can you speculate on what measures the Trump administration might take to eviscerate China's infiltration of the Canadian government and society? Thank you, Dr. Ivory. And Peter says, you talk about Carney. How much longer will he be allowed to take all of those decisions for Canada without any approvals? Thank you very much, Peter.
Well, I'll just make the point, especially in terms of the first 2, in terms of Marxism and what was the second one? Chinese? Yeah. I'm sorry. The problem with Canada is it's under the King of England. Carney just appointed a new governor general. She comes right out of the George Soros stable. She is one of the people who helped set up the infrastructure for this international criminal court. She didn't serve on it, but she set up the Prelude organization and then pushed for the creation of this. This is run directly by, George Soros helps finance it, helps run it. This is a weapon against sovereign nations. I have absolutely no question that in her position there as Governor General of Canada, she's been appointed on behalf of the Crown to work with Carney to try and destroy the United States on behalf of the British Empire. Now, is there Chinese influence in Canada? Sure there is, but it comes by way of the layers in China that are most closely aligned with the globalists. So, keep the top of the food chain in view. The top of the food chain is the British imperial system. Donald Trump is taking that on. And ultimately, I think that's how you deal with Canada.
Yeah, there's also, I'll just add something. I was just seeing some headlines this morning that we're pulling out of joint defense agreements, which we have in Canada, which is causing a major, freak out up there. And I think Trump's going to continue to do that. Oppose us, oppose the United States, get in our way, then you're going to lose your subsidy, which is what it is, from the people of the United States. And let's see how you do without that.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Susan. All right, let's continue on with questions specifically about Alberta, because we got so many questions, people wondering about Alberta independence. Whoops, 18, okay. First one here's from Linda. Hi, friends, just wondering about our neighbors to the north. There was so much momentum for Alberta to leave the Union, and the referendum seemed unanimous. Now I see their courts say it's a no-go. Any word on this? Thank you, Linda. Dale says, can you talk about Alberta independence? I am in favor of an independent Alberta with a USA affiliation. Thank you, Dale. And Michael says, likelihood of Alberta secession with other provinces to follow. Impact of a brand new nation, Albert land, inserted on the US border with a copycat US Constitution and Bill of Rights. Thank you, Michael, for your question. Barbara and Susan, your thoughts on Albertan independence, because we have so many people from Alberta watching our broadcasts.
Well, I certainly am in favor of the people of Alberta making their own decision on this, and I would be really thrilled to begin to see Canada break up in various kinds of ways. That being said, and I'm not on the ground, and this is always a problem that we have. As we've learned in 50 years of political warfare, you really have to be on the ground to know what is truly going on. Otherwise, you're just filtering it through this person's opinion, this YouTube channel, this X post, and so on. But stepping back, I think that the empire is going to pull out all the stops to try and prevent Alberta from doing this. What form it takes, I don't know. I go back to this Governor General, who's obviously a very, very top figure in the globalist pantheon. So is it going to happen this year? I think it's a huge strategic battle. And as I say, I don't think the empire is going to let them go lightly.
Barbara, any thoughts?
No, I think that's what we can honestly say. You got to basically have a lot more fine-tuned intelligence on what's actually going on than what we presently have here at Promethean Action. And we learned a long time ago that getting intelligence from Canada, it goes through prisms of government, control and influence, which make it damn hard to even figure out what's going on. So that I would just second what Susan is saying. And I would hope that people from Alberta could help us and give us a much more fine-tuned reading of what's actually happening on the ground there. And then we might be able to evaluate it a little bit differently.
Thank you very much, ladies. I'm going to hit a super chat here, which is going to bring us back to some domestic legal issues, which I think will be a nice change of pace. So Kevin, again, thank you very much for your questions today. How do we fix the federal courts to work again with Democrat-appointed incompetent activist judges, especially the Washington, D.C. District Court? Thank you very much, Kevin. And we're going to be taking some more questions in this direction moving forward. So Barbara and Susan, your thoughts.
Well, fixing it is a longer term problem, starting with the law schools. You know, you've got people who are being brainwashed as lawyers at this point with their legal education. Washington, D.C. District Court is a special case. It's not just Democrats. It's, you know, Republican appointed judges also who have gone along with things like January 6th, who've gone along with things like Jack Smith, who've gone along with things which are ridiculous. And J.D. Vance was just on, in terms of the fraud task force last week, saying we're just going to avoid those courts for right now. We're going to try and figure out legal theories which put us in a different jurisdiction than Washington, D.C. It's not just the D.C. District Court, it's the juries. You know, you couldn't get, Gene Pirro has had a hard time getting grand jury indictments through on things like, you know, Comey and other things where the jury is just nullifying because the people who are on those grand juries are complete Democratic zealots. So, you know, what J.D. Vance said is we're going to try a lot of these fraud cases, not necessarily in California, which has a similar problem, or Washington, D.C., or the Eastern District of Virginia, all of which have very, very similar problems in them. We're going to forum shop. And he said that basically outright, to find judges who at least will be fair. All right. And I think that's a very sound legal strategy to start. But the problem in terms of fixing this starts in the law schools. It starts with, you know, having a Supreme Court justice who can't say what a woman is. All right. That is your typical legal education at this point in most of the law schools in the United States. It's not just that she's a DEI hire. She is exemplary of the best products of our law schools at this point in time. You know, the entire whole business of DEI and this type of stuff was invented in law schools. People don't really realize that, but that's where it came from.
Yeah, critical theory. When it escaped out of the universities, like the philosophy departments, that's like the first place it ended up was in the legal departments. Thank you, Kevin, for the question. And Susan, do you have anything to say on this?
No, this is Barbara's. This is Barbara's wheelhouse.
Wheelhouse, yes, as they say now. Whoops. So thank you very much, Kevin, for the question. So let's continue on this theme here. So Patricia asked really simply, why did nothing come from the Durham report?
Back to you, Barbara.
Well, things did come from the Durham report. I mean, you know, the things which are now being put into the Florida, I mean, people kind of may have heard about it, but there's a gigantic conspiracy case being built in Florida around the entire fraud of Russiagate. It's in the Southern District of Florida. There's a grand jury sitting down there hearing this stuff right now. And the Durham annex to his report was classified. And nobody knew what was in that classified annex. But Tulsi Gabbard declassified two things. One was, working with Senator Grassley, I have to mention him also, because they sort of were a team on this stuff. But Durham's classified annex and the whole issue of the classified House report on Russiagate, which was locked up in a safe at the CIA, and Gina Haspel was standing there almost with missiles, never letting it leave the premises of the log cabin in the CIA. Tulsi got in there and basically got that report out. And that in turn shows that this entire thing was completely fake. It shows an entire network of people working with Obama in exile to actually undermine Trump's presidency itself. And it has huge implications for a lot of things. And I think you're going to see a prosecution coming out of that, which will kind of blow your mind, because they set themselves a task whether it will be one or two or three indictments or whether it will be one grand indictment. I think that may be a little unwieldy, but their whole idea is to take the entire 10 years, starting with 2015 forward, and investigate everything about it anew and get all the classified nonsense, which was locked away in safes at the CIA. It was locked away in burn bags and in hidden skiffs at the FBI that only the top people, the management of FBI, had access to. All of that stuff has now been retrieved and is being worked on in this Florida case. And how that actually comes out as 4 or 5 indictments or one indictment, I don't know at this point. That's up to the U.S. attorney down in Florida, and it's up to legal tactics in terms of how you try the case. Generally, the best kind of criminal cases are the simplest ones, because you never can tell, even in a favorable jurisdiction, what a jury's going to do. But the point is that you've got to actually see that the administration is moving. The fact that they got this woman, think about that. They got this woman from Jack Smith's task force who stole this report and tried to disguise it on her computer as chocolate cake recipes. They nailed her. How they do that? Well, that tells you that there is a really very, very, very robust investigation going on.
I want the recipe.
I was thinking the same thing. I hope it was I hope she at least picked a good recipe.
It was a good one.
Yeah, I had to pull this up again. When I saw this headline yesterday, it's like a huge face palm. It sounds like some ridiculous stuff. And actually, so let's clear this story loop that came up last week. And again, this continues on the same justice stuff. We never seem to get to the bottom of the story about Tulsi Gabbard and the CIA removing 40 boxes of classified material. Is it because it never happened and was a psyop? If not, what was the purpose of pushing the narrative? Thank you, Suzanne, for the question. Barbara, what's your reading on this? Because this is something that came up over the last week or two.
Yeah, the guy who testified in Congress testified about 2 things. One, he testified about the COVID cover-up, in which I think he made a substantial case. The second is still, in my view, the residue of whatever was going on with Joe Kent and the actual, people who were working in Tulsi's area, and the effort by Laura Loomer and others to really go after Tulsi Gabbard and set her up with the administration on the inside, saying, she's going to resign very soon. She put this guy up there before Congress to testify about something which wasn't true, and she came out and said it wasn't true. And she's going to run for president, and Roger Stone is going to run her campaign, and all of this stuff, which is just circulating like crazy. The target is Tulsi Gabbard, and the target is she is really doing stuff to dismantle this entire deep state apparatus, and they're attacking with guns blazing. So I think I don't have an ultimate determination of exactly why and what I just outlined, how that piece fit. But Joe Kent's, kind of defection out there was designed to, if he wasn't a plant in the first place, designed to sow something in the president's mind about loyalty and Tulsi Gabbard, which was already out there and being pushed like crazy by people who actually want to keep the deep state intact, particularly in the CIA and in the Department of Justice.
Yeah, and also note the timing of that story, which was floated, which was then denied, in terms of the CIA currently doing this. President Trump was in China, and CIA Director Ratcliffe was in Cuba when that story floated. So, you just have to keep all of that in mind when you try and figure out who's doing what to whom. But I think Barbara is absolutely on point in terms of the phenomenal role that Tulsi Gabbard is playing and why she would be so much in the target. And for somebody in the chat, who brought up her old bona fides in terms of World Economic Forum young leader and counsel on foreign relations, People have to get out of the connecto world. You're now in Trump world. Donald Trump has changed the entire political geometry. People who in their past life were living in a world where nobody could challenge the globalists and get ahead are now living in a world where Donald Trump has shown something completely different. And from the standpoint of people like Tulsi Gabbard, Scott Bessent's another one where people say, oh, he worked for George Soros. Yeah, he also crashed the British pound. So I kind of like what he learned under George Soros. But, you know, these are people who no one has shown me anything under Trump 47 that indicates they are not absolutely locked in carrying out the president's agenda.
Thank you, ladies, and thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I have plenty more questions. All right. These next two questions are about the Dearborn Muslim situation, which is a definite storyline on some circles on the internet.
Not some, lots.
So I'm gonna read two questions. One's addressed to Susan and one's addressed to Barbara, but on the same topic. So first one's from Annie. Susan, you have stated that we need not worry about Muslims in this country. I've been watching the status in Dearborn, Michigan. Now, monitoring the status. Now, reportedly, Muslims are demanding churches stop ringing bells on Sunday. Apparently, a Muslim complaint stated, we are a Muslim majority town and you have to respect us, okay, according to Sharia law. How can someone as educated as yourself be so lulled into believing what Muslims have done to every other country won't happen again in America? It's the frog in the pot of warming water. Why do you say they are not a threat? Thank you, Annie. And the second one here is from Andy. I've heard Barbara indicate Muslims are no problem with her proximity to Dearborn, but if you look at what's happening in the UK in Islam's plan of conquest, it seems like the plan is being executed and the potential is there for big problems down the road. The plan is assimilate peacefully, gather in numbers through polygamy, and their candidates into government, gain power in government, and then parse the infidel. Could she or Susan explain why there's no threat? Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Annie, for your questions. So, ladies, your response to
everyone knows I can't resist. Well, I'm glad you said reportedly in terms of church bells. Please send me actual documentation that that is happening. I know Christians, I know Muslims, I know Jews in Dearborn, and I'm 7 miles away from it. I have absolutely no evidence of this. Now, what is the problem? The problem is political Islam, Islamic fundamentalism. That is a problem. It is here. It is in Dearborn, but it's not Muslims. Honestly, it's like the same thing saying all the Jews are the problem. Are there problems with revisionist Zionism? Big time. Are there problems with political Islam? Big time. Is it being deployed massively in Europe to destroy cultures? Big time. All of that is true. But when people just say it's the Jews or it's the Muslims, honestly, part of that is just plain racist and stupid. But be a little bit more sophisticated. As I've said time and time again, Donald Trump won Michigan because of two factors coming over: blue-collar votes and conservative Muslims who delivered such overwhelming votes for Donald Trump in Dearborn, Dearborn Heights, and Hamtramck. They couldn't even try and steal the votes in Wayne County. So my objection is when people say Muslims or Jews, rather than actually looking at the very dangerous, and yes, we should be concerned, the very dangerous political formations which the imperial system has created and which we should be on watch for and which we need to combat.
Barbara, your thoughts on this?
It'd be a good idea for a lot of people to read Schiller's history, Friedrich Schiller's history of the 30 Years' War in Europe between Protestants and Catholics, which, immolated millions of people. The British have understood this dynamic for centuries. That's why I think what's going on right now is that the Middle East dynamic of wars between Muslims and Jews is being deliberately imported into the United States as a political dynamic. And it is designed to do exactly what it has done for centuries, which is each side in that type of religious warfare thinks that God has basically told them that this journey that they're on in fighting the war is God's pleasure. It becomes very, very difficult to stop a war when that is going on both sides of the equation. And I think people really need to stand back and think about that. Muslims represent about 1% of the population of the United States. And yet we've got entire localities in the United States freaking out about Sharia law taking over. It's true that there are certain enclaves where Muslims are gathering with other Muslims. You might ask yourself how much of the anti-Muslim sentiment actually is contributing to that versus some kind of notion that we don't want to assimilate. Black people always used to congregate a lot with Black folks. Why was that? Because they were actually in the midst of a hysteria about a racist hysteria in which they had no other human, ability to integrate. So it really does all go back in terms of the United States to Martin Luther King's, kind of criterion. It's your character, which actually, matters. Think about the Muslims delivering the vote for Donald Trump in Michigan. Did that have anything to do with the Middle East? I would say hardly. Most of the Muslim propaganda at that point, the political Islam propaganda, was painting him as a tool of Netanyahu. So why would Muslims, and Gaza was going on at that point, and people were being slaughtered from their own families in Michigan. So what did they see there that was different from what you think Sharia law or a Muslim way of thinking actually is? It's, in my view, a gigantic psyop designed to bring the Middle East right to the center of United States politics. And it's not something that is healthy, and it's not something we should tolerate.
And I just want to respond to a couple of comments. Islam is not a religion, it's a militant organization, et cetera, et cetera. Please read Bob Dreyfus's book before you comment again, entitled Devil's Deal. Barbara, is that the title? She's probably going to grab it, because you will see that this question of a militant organization was a devil's game. Thank you. The question of a militant organization was created in the 19th century directly by British intelligence with receipts, with pay stubs. And then it metastasized into the Muslim Brotherhood in 1928. There's another book by Mark Curtis entitled Secret Agenda. Please just read those books. And if you read those books and you still want to push back, that's fine with me. But please read those books.
Yeah, so here's the other book, Devil's Game. I actually thank you for bringing up the 30 Years' War, Barbara. Let me pull up the more historical one that I just pulled up, History of the 30 Years' War by Friedrich Schiller. I think the thing that kind of leads into today especially is that what ended the 30 Years' War was something called the Peace of Westphalia. And it was the Peace of Westphalia that became, I guess, the modern international diplomatic structure that we have today, where nations have diplomats and we always try to engage other nations. That kind of system came out of the resolution of the 30 Years' War called the Peace of Westphalia. It was Tony Blair who explicitly made it his job to destroy the Peace of Westphalia. I think Barbara can say some more on this, but I think this issue pulls directly into the modern era, especially when you look at how Tony Blair made public speeches attacking the Peace of Westphalia. So I just wanted to add that in there too. Yeah,
Tony Blair was pretty famous as the author of our disastrous war with Iraq, and he, had George W. Bush around his little finger, so to speak, figuratively, and he made speeches in Chicago and elsewhere saying that the Peace of Westphalia, i.e. the idea that you only wage war from a defensive standpoint, and you try and engage in diplomatic relationships based on the idea of the advantage of the other. That the advantage of the other is sort of like what Donald Trump tries to think about, I believe, in every single one of his so-called deals. All right. He's looking at what can I give you that you actually need and what can you give me? Islam is a long-standing religion. It is so ancient that Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa actually wrote books comparing Islam with Judaism and with Christianity. And again, in his book, The Peace of the Faith, said what you've got to do is figure out the best parts, the highest parts, the most human celebrating parts of each one of these religions as the basis for an ecumenical dialogue. What the British have done instead is to try and find the most primitive sides of all of these religions and actually set them against one another, because they understand that there's no ending a religious war once it starts. It's the most difficult thing in the world to deal with. That's what President Trump is attempting to deal with in his Board of Peace. So people really got to think through this, because the biggest goal of intelligence operations, all right, is operating on your fear of the other. All right. It actually is, goes back in philosophy to Aristotle. But the idea is the other, which is different than you, and how do you relate to the other, it is what they play upon and make these gigantic cartoonish images of the worst brutality and the worst kind of anti-human bestiality as the basis for trying to destroy exactly what happened in Michigan in 2024. And I think people really got to think about this, because this is the center of British strategic policy. It's what's called counterinsurgency, setting two groups of people into hostile confrontations which never end. While I, on the other hand, go around you and actually figure out how to fill my pockets while you're at war with this other person who you've learned to hate. So I think that's got to be thought through on a much different level.
I want to quickly, since we're near the top of the hour here, Kim Trump 8665 has a good question, and I think it will actually help people think through what we've just been discussing. She says, I'm trying to understand the City of London, but so confused. Is there a good book I can read that can give me more of an understanding? Let me make two recommendations. Our historian, Robert Ingram, has written a book called The Anglo-Dutch Empire. That takes it completely historically grounded and brings it up to today. You can get that on Amazon, Robert Ingram. But there's also a Substacker. Barbara's done some interviews on other channels with her, named Vivify Mariposa. She's recently done, there's Bob's book, The Modern Anglo-Dutch Empire. That's your best historical grounding. If you want a kind of Cliff Notes version of it, Vivify Mariposa recently did something on the city that I can't remember what its actual title was, but she does a couple of 1,000-word summary of the current power of the City of London. Bob's book, I think, takes it back much more historically and conceptually, but Vivify's work is very useful from that standpoint. There it is. The City That Owns Everything and Answers to No One on Substack. Vivify Mariposa. You're muted, Adam.
Thank you very much, Kim Trump, for your question. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If you have not yet subscribed to the Promethean Action YouTube channel, please do that again. We are less than 1,300 subscribers away to hitting 600,000 subs on YouTube. Barbara and Susan, last words for our audience before we join them again next week.
Go back to what I opened with. The issue is the American system versus the British system. That has been the issue in the world for 250 years because it's based on two competing images of man. The British system says you're an animal. You can be manipulated on the basis of ideologies, your perceptions, your senses. The American system says you're in the image of the creator and your responsibility is to continue his creation. That's the fight. Measure everything against that. And if we do, we'll make it through the midterms.
Yeah, we have a giant task ahead of us, which is to win these midterm elections so that this revolution being conducted by the president can continue. And that requires, two fronts. One, a positive front, really laying out what the administration is doing, which is phenomenal, and which most people haven't heard a word about because the Republican state parties are cowering, thinking that Donald Trump is the problem as opposed to the solution. And the second thing is we've got to continuously dismantle and neuter these cyber operations, which are being run full-fledged on you and everybody else out there to get you distracted from that first task. So that's how I'd end it. It's really is, as Tom Paine said famously, the times which try men's souls.
One final thank you to everyone, including the people that sent in super chats. I still have like 30 super chats here I haven't even put on the screen. I'm very sorry I didn't get to it today. Also, all the hundreds of people that send us questions. We do read every single question. We read every super chat, so we do hear you. It's just very hard for us to get to every single communication. We'll be back next Thursday at the same time, 11 a.m. Eastern. And thank you very much, everyone. Make sure you get our free newsletter. We'll see you next week.